Welcome back to Housebuild TV. This evening we're going to discuss Part D, toxic substances. And welcome back Geoff Wilkinson from Wilkinson Construction and Eoghain Ryan from Ryan & Associates and housebuild.co.uk. Thank you for joining us again, Geoff.
It's good to see you. Good to see you. Yeah, so today we're going to go on to Part D. Now, that's probably one of the thinnest of the approved documents that we have to deal with. There's not an enormous amount of content in approved document B, approved document D. The section itself is about the use of urea formaldehyde in cavity wall insulation, and it really came about probably in the sort of early 1980s when there was a real trend to start retrofitting cavity wall insulation into existing buildings that had been built sort of 1960s, 1970s with an unfilled cavity, and it was seen at that time as the future. It was a great way of improving the thermal insulation values of the walls. But the problem was that the product itself gave off quite toxic fumes. So this particular regulation was brought in to address that. Now, this is probably one of the main parts of the regulations that really needs some serious updating, because it's very outdated in how people are doing stuff in the current day. One of the things I always remember back in the 1980s when they were doing this kind of stuff was that they would forget to actually block off the cavities around air bricks or at the tops of roofs or between adjoining properties, and they'd come along and they'd get the old insulation materials and they'd pump them into the cavity, and they'd promptly disappear into the basement or out of an air brick or into the adjoining properties, or basically all over the place. So a lot of it was actually down to the quality of the workmanship, and it was one of those where a real industry kind of sprung up around this great sudden need to do it without any real training whatsoever. And I think that's perhaps the biggest issue in terms of where we are today, because we know for a fact that we've got to address the climate change situation, and in order to do that, retrofitting insulation to buildings is going to become increasingly a popular method, and we're seeing some quite strong kind of sales stuff going on in and around that area at the moment. And this is where we start to get some concerns about how retrofitting insulation will actually be done. And I think this is where possibly the approved document should be changed in the future to cover not just retrofitting cavity insulation in this way, but for upgrading all properties through retrofitting. So what am I talking about there? Well, I think first of all, the real reason why it would be beneficial to have it through this is because that would be a method, one, to oversee the workmanship generally of all of these, and secondly, it's a means of reporting back to government just how many of these schemes have actually been undertaken and completed. So we'd start to get some really good figures about the number of completions that have been carried out to retrofit existing properties.
Geoff, there's a requirement for 15 million homes in the UK by 2030.
Yeah,
I know in Ireland we have 500,000 homes to be retrofitted. I can't see that happening because we don't have the workforce. And again, there's limitations on the types of material you're using, external walls, external wall insulation. And I know we discussed briefly before this, but the foam spray and the attics, which would be, you would have to make sure toxic substances for Part D. Yeah. But a lot of these products, because of what's happened with external wall insulation, may not necessarily have the DOPs for it, and they're like, in one hand we want to retrofit and make it more energy efficient, and the other hand we're not strictly complying with, say, Part B and other requirements. So there's this, it's not conjoined thinking, there's a kind of not a gray area, but it's black and white, and there's no one kind of joining the dots. And as you say, a lot of it leads to workmanship, but it's how we're going to meet our climate change requirements is significant. And to do 15 million homes in the UK, I'm not sure if that can be done by 2030. I'm certainly not sure if 500,000 houses in Ireland can be done, even though there's a big drive to get it done, but it's getting the people to do it.
Absolutely. So I think that there's a couple of things. It might be worth you just mentioning, Ryan, Owen, what you mean by DOP, because not everyone will understand the use of that particular term.
A DOP is a declaration of performance where it states where a product can be used and the efficacy and the materials of that particular product in whatever building regulations. So it's key. It's most products have to have CE certs. I'm not sure in the UK that you're going away from that now, obviously, because you're out of Europe. But all products as part of our constructions product directive have to have either have to have both a CE cert and a DOP, and people have to install it then as per the manufacturer's specifications. And that's what we see massively on site is, while a lot of these products might have a DOP and they might have a CE cert, they're using the wrong product in the wrong place. And that's where limitations of use, which is written out in your DOP or your manufacturer's technical specifications, people don't adhere to that. And that's where there's gaps. But like, it's getting better. And the likes of having smartphones and being able to download these stuff onto your phone and getting stuff off the likes of housebuild.com and housebuild.co.uk really gives you the information of what you need to be. And we're partnering now with some big manufacturers that will be you'll be easily able to download where a particular material can be used and where it can't be used. So we're trying to make it easier for everyone in the marketplace. But that's, you know, and that's where you always see gaps in construction or in deficiencies, because you'd have the wrong product used in the wrong place.
Absolutely. So you're quite right. So we're moving towards what's typically referred to as UK construction mark, as opposed to CE markings. There's a whole tranche of changes within the regulations that we're expecting to be introduced over coming years, as we start to revert back to referencing what would be British standards, which are traditionally the route by which you demonstrate compliance, but also the things like British Board of Agreement certificates. One of the things to be very wary of is that some of the products that we're talking about here are coming from, say, Canada or the United States, or even sort of mainland Europe. And quite often, the actual test criteria and declaration of performance can be different to the expectation in the UK. You also briefly mentioned about spray foam insulation, which still remains one of our huge concerns as we move forwards. There's been a lot of recent coverage in the national press about the use of spray foam insulation and how that can end up with making your property unmortgageable. At the time of recording this, the expectation is that within the next couple of weeks, the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, RICS, will be producing some further guidance for surveyors on how to identify these properties and what's an appropriate use of them. We're starting to see them not only used within the existing dwellings, but also in new builds as well. So I think we really do need to kind of make sure that we're on top of the appropriateness of that. So as I say, Part D doesn't contain an enormous amount at the moment. It literally starts to talk about that. One thing I should mention is that primarily the original concern was about the fumes that were given off, both during the installation itself and being gradually released over a longer period of time as well. And that's going to take us neatly onto Part F, which we'll be doing in a few weeks' time, where we start talking about some of the issues that we have with air quality in our homes and about volatiles within the air. But we're not going to be covering that today. We will be covering that in detail when we come to Part F. So stay tuned, keep watching, and look out for that in a future broadcast.